Good evening, and may peace be upon you. Welcome to Peace of Mind, Rahat Abal, Mental Health and Islam, presented by NAMI Greater Cleveland. My name is Archie Green, Support and Education Coordinator with NAMI Greater Cleveland. And before we begin our program officially, I'd like to introduce NAMI Greater Cleveland intern, Salma Sharif, and her brother, Musa Sharif, with a special presentation.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We start in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Before we get to the opening, I just want to put out there that we will be reciting the Quran, 2 chapters from the Quran. And for us Muslims, this is something we use as a guide and we refer to for our own personal mental health trials. So a little bit of context. The 2 chapters we will be looking at are Surah Ad-Duha, the morning hour, and Surah Al-Inshira, which means the relief. And the context is that these 2 revelations were brought down to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, at a time where he was experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety and worry. So we will start off with the translation first for Surah Ad-Duha, the morning hours. The translation goes as follows. By the morning brightness and by the night when it covers the darkness, your Lord has not taken leave of you, O Muhammad, nor has he detested you, and the hereafter is better for you than the first life, and your Lord is going to give you, and you will be satisfied. Did he not find you an orphan and give you refuge? And he found you lost and guided you, and he found you poor and made you self-sufficient. So as for the orphan, do not oppress him, and as for the petitioner, do not repel him, but as for the favor of your Lord, report it. Now we will proceed on to the Arabic recitation of Surah Ad-Duha.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wad-duha wal-layli idha saja. Ma wadda'aka rabbuka wa ma qala. وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث.
And we will now proceed to the next translation of Surah Al-Inshira, which means the relief. So it goes as follows. Did we not expand for you, O Muhammad, your chest, and we removed from you your burden, which had weighed upon your back, and raised high for you your repute, for indeed with hardship will be ease. Indeed with hardship will be ease. So when you have finished your duties, then stand up for worship, and to your Lord your longing. And basically in these 2 chapters, God is telling Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, do not worry, place your trust in me, I will provide for you. And now we will go on to the Arabic recitation of Surah Al-Inshira, the relief.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب صدق الله العظيم.
And that concludes our opening. Thank you all for attending. We'll pass it back to Archie. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Salma and Musa. That was a beautiful, beautiful presentation. Again, I want to welcome everyone to Peace of Mind, Mental Health in Islam. Again, my name is Archie Green. I'm Support and Education Coordinator here at NAMI Greater Cleveland. Before I give a brief overview of our organization and our goals for the program tonight, I do want to acknowledge for all of our Muslim attendees, I do understand that you do have Maghrib this evening, and I want to let you know that this program is being recorded in its entirety. So if you need to step away for prayer, please feel free to do that at any given time tonight. Anything you miss will be reposted to the NAMI Greater Cleveland YouTube page. So I wanted to make sure that I shared that and acknowledge that this evening. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, was founded in 1979. It is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans affected by mental illness. It started with two moms who wanted better for their sons. Our mission is to empower people living with mental illness and their families to achieve a better quality of life by providing support, info, referrals, and advocacy. We know that education plays a critical role in reducing stigma. In addition to presentations like today, we also provide courses taught by NAMI certified teachers and highly trained volunteers who either have lived experience or are family members. These courses give information on diagnosis, treatment services, communication skills, and coping strategies. We offer support groups for family members, peers, and both. We also operate a helpline and live chat Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. Please visit our website at namigreatercleveland.org for the most up-to-date calendar of events. NAMI Greater Cleveland is also able to offer our programming free of charge due to the generosity of our funders. Please be sure to complete the post-presentation evaluation from SurveyMonkey, which I'll share in the chat this evening during our presentation, so we can continue to serve the community and do our part in helping everyone live their healthiest lives. And at this point, what I would like to do is introduce our keynote speaker. And so I will read her biography, and then we will get started. Dr. Suzy Ismail is the founding director of Cornerstone, a nonprofit faith-based communication intervention organization with several locations around the world that focus on youth, family, marriage, identity, socioemotional wellness, and relationship rebuilding. She is the author of many books, including Modern Muslim Marriage, 9 to 5, When Muslim Marriage Fails, and several other works. She specializes in educating and empowering women, youth, and vulnerable populations by presenting a range of workshops, lectures, programs, diversity seminars, and corporate trainings, both nationally and internationally. As a visiting professor for over a decade in the communication departments of Rutgers University and DeVry University, Dr. Ismail has researched, written, and presented extensively on the intersectionality of education, faith, communication, and culture. She has also served for many years as a student advisor, teacher, and board member of a local Islamic school. Dr. Ismail has been interviewed on numerous media outlets and is often featured on talk shows, radio and television broadcasts, and podcasts regarding her work. She has presented on topics of marriage, family, parenting, identity, and teens at many public and private universities around the world and at the World Meeting of Families during Pope Francis's first visit to the US. She has traveled to the border of Syria to work with refugee women, families, and orphans, and continues her work with resettlement and relief agencies providing integration intervention. For many years, Dr. Ismail has served as executive officer and director on several nonprofit boards, commissions, and organizations. Her humanitarian work has been recognized with numerous awards, including the Ambassador for Peace Award and the Visionary Muslim Award. She holds an MA in Communication and in Human Services and a PhD in Family Studies and Intervention Strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Suzy Ismail.
Thank you so much, Archie, for that somewhat long introduction. I would have given you a shortened version instead of such a long one, but I appreciate you providing the introduction. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We begin in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace and blessings be upon you. It's always an honor and a pleasure to partner with organizations that are doing the hard work on the ground of trying to remove the stigma that surrounds mental health. And our community, our Muslim community, is definitely no stranger to that stigma. And so tonight, together, inshallah, we want to work through the hesitations, the fears, the concerns, the questions that we may have about mental health and the intersection of mental health and our faith. Because it is not an oxymoron to be able to practice faith and to also pay attention and really address mental health and achieve mental wellness. So I'm going to take a moment now to share my screen so that we can journey together. Oops, and now I'm having trouble with the screen sharing. Oh, I got it. Okay, good. So that we can journey together in learning a bit more about the intersection of mental health in Islam. And I absolutely love the Rahat al-Bal title that was selected here, because truly when we are able to address mental health and we're able to address the difficulties that plague us in terms of mental wellness, we can achieve Rahat al-Bal. Right, Bismillah. So when we address mental health issues through our perspective and through our offices at Cornerstone, we really feel that the term mental health can be somewhat limiting, because rather than just focusing on one part of how we address the world around us, how we see the world, we recognize that to address the whole person, we have to understand all of the intersecting pieces of that person. And so we prefer to, rather than say that we're going to seek mental wellness or address mental health care, we prefer to look at spiritual, socio-emotional wellness, because that tends to do a better job of addressing all of the different pieces that make us who we are and that can impact the way that we see the world. So when we take a holistic approach, we ensure that we are not just isolating certain elements of who we are, so that we're not ignoring the spiritual aspect, we're not ignoring the mental aspect, but we're recognizing that there is impact on how we interact with the world, how we respond to the world around us. That starts at the intrapersonal level, meaning internally, our relationship with God, our relationship with faith, and on that intrapersonal level in terms of our relationship with ourself, our self-esteem, our self-valuation, our self-confidence, our self-talk. And all of that internal work can be impacted by what's happening around us, by the relational, by the emotional, by even our physical and nutritional impact, and of course, by the mental. So when we look at mental health from an Islamic perspective, the first question that we often need to address, or that we need to really understand, is, can mental health difficulty, mental health struggles, can they exist while still adhering to faith? And it's a question that's asked because many times, when people are struggling with depression, when they're struggling with anxiety, when they're struggling with mental health difficulties that may have been diagnosed or may not have been diagnosed, the response when speaking to someone of faith is, well, your faith is weak. You need to pray more. If you turn to God, then you're going to feel better. All of these problems will disappear. And we know that that's not the case. Because when we look to the Quran, we see that there are verses in the Quran specifically that address these emotions, that address these states and these stages that we experience. And we heard the beautiful recitation at the start of this program. And subhanAllah, Surah Al-Duha, the chapter or the verse of Al-Duha that was recited first, is one of the verses, one of the chapters that I had included in my presentation as well. Because it is a reference to an understanding that difficulty is something that we're all going to experience. And in this verse, in the second chapter in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest chapter of the Quran, we see a reminder that we will be tested. And we'll be tested بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ. So we'll be tested with something of fear and something of hunger and something of loss, a loss of wealth, a loss of lives, a loss of fruits. So that being tested with fear right off the bat, if you have ever experienced any form of anxiety, you know the test of fear. If you have ever experienced paranoia, if you have ever experienced a sense where you are worried about the future, we know how difficult that test can be. And it's the very first test that's mentioned in this list of tests. And so it's a test that exists. But we also see that at the end of this verse, we're reminded that there's good news to the patient, as-sabirin. But when we look at the kind of the etymology of the word sabr in the Arabic language, we see that it's actually an active verb. It doesn't mean to be passive. It doesn't mean to accept that you are being tested and that you just have to take that test and keep moving forward. Sabr is active, patience is active, in that you also need to do your part to recognize that with every test, there's also a solution. And sometimes that solution comes in the form of the people who surround you, the mental health help that you can get from those organizations, those service providers, those specialists that you can speak to get that help, to help you through the test. So we don't want to deny that the tests exist. We know that the Quran reminds us that the tests exist, and we have so many examples as a Muslim community within our faith of tests that the prophets had been tested with, tests and the overcoming of those tests. And we see that every time that a test was overcome, that prayer, the spiritual aspect, was one part of it. But there was also the seeking of help, the recognition that help can be coming in the form of those around you, of people who can help you. And so we've seen that over and over again in the Quran and in the Sunnah, or the hadith of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So these verses that are up here on this slide are the verses that were recited at the start of this program, the verses of Surah Al-Duha. And it's such a beautiful chapter in the Quran because it indicates and reminds us that even the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, experienced sadness. And I listed up a couple of emotions here, or states of being, that are important to address, because sometimes we can mix the feelings up. And someone who is struggling with depression, we may say, oh, they're just sad. Someone who is truly going through despair, we may say, oh, they're just sorrowful. But there is a big difference in each of these states or emotions, and a difference in the way that we approach them. So the equation of sadness, or the analogy that we can maybe experience when we think about sadness, the Surah Al-Duha, this chapter of Al-Duha, is a good reminder of understanding sadness. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, as Muslims, we believe that the time in his life when these verses were revealed was experiencing sadness. And he experienced sadness because there had been a period of time in which revelation had not been revealed to him. And so he missed that revelation. He missed that connection with God. He missed something in his life. How many of us have experienced moments in our life when we miss something? All I have to say is the year 2020, and we all know what we're talking about. Throughout this time in COVID, along with the fear and that anxiety that accompanied the worries of the health of our loved ones, our own health, and what the ramifications of this virus could be, for many of us, we also experienced sadness in missing school, maybe missing weddings, missing travel plans, maybe missing things that internally we may have almost felt bad about feeling sad for, right? Because we may have felt like, oh, people are dying. I shouldn't be upset that this vacation that I had planned for 10 years, I can't go on it, but I'm still sad. And it's so important for us to be aware and to validate those emotions and to recognize that sadness exists, and sadness can exist when we miss something. But there's a beautiful reminder in these verses that were revealed to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, when he experienced sadness upon missing the revelation. And it was reminders of where the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had been in his life and where he was now. So when in the Quran, and as Muslims, we believe that the Quran is the word of God, when God reminds the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى, did we not find you as an orphan and give you refuge? It is a reminder that yes, you went through difficulty, but you were uplifted from that difficulty. And sometimes in sadness, we need that reminder, but it can be really hard for us to remember it internally on our own. And so when we speak to a mental health professional, when we speak to a counselor, when we speak to a therapist, we can alleviate some of that sadness as they help us to do that journey of remembering that, yes, it's understandable to be sad. It's acceptable to be sad. It is completely within the realm of normalcy to experience sadness as a human emotion. But what to do about it is to validate it, to recognize it, and then to understand it. And it may take us some time to recover from that sadness, or we may be able to recover quickly. Each of us processes our sadness differently. Now, as we move from sadness and into grief, grief is often seen as a heavier manifestation of sadness. Grief can often accompany the loss of someone, or the loss of something that was very, very important to you. And again, many of us throughout this period of time, throughout the COVID and the pandemic period, we've experienced grief. We've lost loved ones. We've lost people that we care about. And we will continue to experience grief because, again, it's a human emotion. And there's a beautiful narration of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, experiencing grief upon the burial of his infant son, Ibrahim. And in that narration of the expression of grief, we're told that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, wept. And when he wept, the people around him asked and said, why are you weeping? Isn't this the qadr of Allah? Isn't this the divine will of God? And so the Prophet responded and said, "Al-ayn tadma' wal-qalb yahzan." The eye may shed tears and the heart may feel sadness, but the tongue does not say that which would be against God or would be against Allah or is displeasing to our Lord. And so grief is, again, a normal human reaction, a human response to loss. And from the Islamic perspective, many of you may be familiar with the 5 stages of grief. We know that they are not linear. We know that someone can be in denial and then jump to bargaining and then struggle with depression, which we're going to talk about in a bit, and enter into anger. But we also know that from the Islamic perspective, we want to try to begin when we are tested from that place of acceptance and saying, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And there's a beautiful narration of the Prophet reminding a woman who in her grief said very difficult words, very harsh words. And he reminded her that in that moment of grief, that the first response should be a reminder to the self that it is truly to God that we belong and to God that we return. But beginning with that stage of acceptance does not mean that we won't experience anger and denial and bargaining and depression. We may experience those different stages of grief, and we may need that help of someone beside us to guide us through it. Now, when we move from grief and into the stage of sorrow, again, we know that this is a more intense or a lengthier stage of responding to difficulty in a way that within itself can be difficult. And we know that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, went through Am al-Huzn, or the year of sorrow, an entire year in which things were difficult, in which he felt heavy. It was following the loss of his beloved wife, Khadija, radiallahu anha, may God be pleased with her, and his beloved uncle. And in that year of sorrow, in that difficulty, it did not mean that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was shaken in his faith. It did not mean that he wasn't patient. No, he was patient and his faith was strong, but he still experienced that sorrow. And he had hope that he would exit through that sorrow, so much hope that when he entered into the town of Ta'if, he felt that this would be his opening, a chance to speak about the faith, to teach people that there is one God and only one God. And we know as Muslims, the story of Ta'if is an important part of our faith, that it was a time in which the sorrow wasn't lifted, that he was rejected, that he was pelted with rocks. But that didn't mean that he gave up hope. So he did his part of seeking out a relief for his sorrow, of speaking to people, of entering into a town. And even though his difficulty still existed, he continued to have hope. He continued to have faith. He continued to move forward. And as Muslims, we believe that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was then blessed with al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, the great ascension, which was a gift. And in that gift was also given the gift of prayer. And we're going to talk a little bit about prayer and sorrow and how the two can kind of, how you can work through sorrow while using prayer. So let's talk about depression, because we've recognized sadness, we've recognized sorrow, we've recognized grief, and we know that these are all states that all of us will probably encounter at some point in our lives. But depression has more of a physical manifestation. Depression is classified as a mental health struggle or a mental health illness. And it's a struggle that one should not be ashamed of. It's a struggle that, again, in the Quran, we have an example of someone who experienced this depression. And we as Muslims believe that the verse in the Quran that speaks of Maryam, who is known in the Christian tradition as Mary, that speaks of Maryam alayha salam going through the difficulties of labor, the pain of labor. And in that moment when she's experiencing great pain, when she calls out in pain and she says, Ya laytani mittu qabla hadha wa kuntu nasyan mansiya. Oh, if only I had died before this and had been of those who were forgotten. And so we see in that thread, in that verse from the Quran, a recollection and understanding that Maryam alayha salam, who was considered one of the chosen women who was promised Jannah, experienced a moment of difficulty in which she wished she was forgotten. For many people who struggle with depression, this may be a feeling that they have, and they may be feeling ashamed of having this thought, this feeling of saying, I wish I wouldn't wake up today. I wish I would go to sleep and that would be the last day of my life. I wish that I could have ended things before entering into this difficulty or before experiencing this difficulty. Now, what's so beautiful about this verse in the Quran is that we see the response. The verse that follows is a verse that does not rebuke Maryam alayhi salam for making this statement, but it's a verse instead that brings her calm and comfort. A verse that says, Nudiya min tahtiha, that a voice calls to her from beneath her, and that voice says, La tahzani, do not be sad. And the voice commands her to do something, to shake the trunk of the palm tree so the dates may fall. And so we see that the response to depression is not one that is filled with shame. It's a response of comfort, a response that's action-oriented, a response that is not centered only about be patient and make dua and pray. It's a response that actually it really motivates someone to do something. And so when we struggle with depression, when our loved ones struggle with depression, we shouldn't be ashamed to recognize that depression exists. And it is not an indicator of a lack of faith. It is not an indicator of something that should be shoved under the rug and not talked about. It's a call for help. And oftentimes the person who is calling for help doesn't even have the energy or the bandwidth to call out for help. And so you may identify depression in the form of someone not being able to wake up in the morning, someone not being interested in things they were once interested in, someone shutting themselves off, or it could show in other ways. A manic depressive episode may be quite the opposite of that, but still the person is not acting in the way that you may be used to them acting. And then, of course, there are times when they will actually say, I feel so depressed. We may hear this from our own children. We may hear it from our children's friends. We may hear it in our classrooms. Do not dismiss it. Do not just think, well, it's just a lark. It's just somebody making a comment. Believe a person who says that they're struggling with depression. Believe them and give them the resources and the guidance to be able to seek help. If someone says, I have a stomach ache and my stomach is always killing me every time I eat, you're not going to be like, oh, you're just kidding. Like, seriously, stop copying people, right? No, you're going to say, you know what, go to this gastroenterologist. He's great. Go to this specialist. He's going to help you. Or go to this doctor. She's absolutely wonderful. She can help you, right? We're going to give the resources. We're also not going to try to diagnose. We're not going to say, oh, well, you have a stomach ache. This must be, I don't know, an enlarged gland in the thyroid, right? No, we're not going to try to diagnose if that's not our field, right? We're going to guide them to the right resources. And mental health difficulties are no different. Now, the last stage or the last state of being that I had described in that list is the state of despair. And in the Quran, we are reminded, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله, which means do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Because despair is the stage where you may have experienced sadness, you may have experienced grief, you may have experienced sorrow, you may have gone through the stages of grief with anger and bargaining and denial, you may have gone through all of these stages, you may have even experienced depression and not gotten the help that you need. Because when you enter into despair, that is often the place where you may give up on life, where you feel that there's no hope, where you feel that there's no compassion. And that's a very scary place to be. And so we want to make sure that within our own communities, within our own families, within our own selves, that we don't get to that place of despair, that we seek help if we find ourselves heading in that direction, or if anyone we know is. So what are some of the mental health struggles that we see? Remember, we said that holistic wellness incorporates all of the aspects of a being, and it's the spiritual, which we've talked about, but it's also the relational, the mental, and the physical, and all of these other elements that come hand in hand together. So we often hear, anxiety, panic attacks. We hear them almost used interchangeably. Sometimes we'll hear someone saying, oh, I'm so anxious right now, or, oh, I feel so anxious, right? And it's a term that's become almost part of our vernacular, very similar to saying, oh, I'm so depressed, when it may be, I'm feeling sad, I'm experiencing sorrow, I'm going through grief, right? And so unfortunately, when we kind of co-opt these words, we may lose sight of the weightiness and the importance of attaching a recognition, and particularly a clinical recognition, to what these words mean. So anxiety may be something that is more sustained. It may begin as those butterflies in the stomach. It may be a feeling that feels like something heavy is in your chest, or like needles are poking in on the inside of your body. It may be more in the mental realm, where the mind starts to speed up and we have increased uncertainty, avoidance. And so the more uncertain a situation is, the more we want to avoid it. And so our anxiety increases. A panic attack can often be more on the physical realm. Panic attacks are sometimes actually mistaken, or they may look like an epilepsy episode, where someone actually begins to shake and is unable to stop, a seizure-like response. A panic attack can be someone who has difficulty breathing and is hyperventilating. A panic attack can begin with sweaty palms and some other type of psychosomatic response. The important thing to note, though, is it's not up to us, as bystanders, as even if we are loved ones and friends and community members, to make the call and to say, oh, you're just having a panic attack, or, oh, that's fine, you're just feeling a little anxious. It happens to me all of the time. Every situation, every incident needs to be seen as isolated and contextually within its own realm, having its own meaning. We can't just dismiss mental health struggles and think that they don't mean anything. And a lot of times when someone's experiencing anxiety, the response is like, oh, you're just stressed out. And that may be so, but there are different forms of anxiety. There is situational anxiety that may be in response to a situation. There is clinical anxiety, which is something that is diagnosed. There is chronic anxiety, which is an anxiety that kind of follows you around like a shadow anywhere you go. And these types of anxiety can impact the relationship you have with spouse, with children, with family members, with coworkers, with colleagues. And so it's important for it to be addressed. Now, we also know that there are more intensified mental health struggles that are diagnosed, such as borderline personality disorder, BPD-1 and BPD-2, PTSD, OCD. And I know these are a lot of letters that are thrown out, but we recognize that each of these, diagnoses have merit and weight in that they can be addressed, and that there are remedies. And those remedies may take a certain combination. It may take connecting with the right therapist. It may take finding the right counselor. It may take going to a psychiatrist, not just a psychologist. It may take CBT, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. It may take EMDR. It may take different forms of therapy, and it may not be resolved at once. And it may take medication. And whatever the approach is, and this is one of the most beautiful things I think about approaching mental health from the perspective of a holistic viewpoint, these approaches are not isolated, that there are connections between the approaches to try to achieve the best results. And just looking at, some of these letters that I have up here, when we look at PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, we are seeing a lot of PTSD responses in many young children and teens following COVID and the pandemic and the return to school. And many of the responses to the recovery, I guess, the process of re-engaging and entering the world again are very similar to what we see in PTSD cases among our refugee clients. And the emotional resilience and the shift in emotional resilience can be very similar. OCD behaviors, our Muslim community is definitely not immune to OCD behaviors that can be very detrimental to an individual, to families, to homes, to relationships. And we see, OCD behaviors such as scrupulosity, which is a behavior that's linked in ritualistic behavior that tends to be something we find in the Muslim community quite frequently. So someone who will pray Maghrib, for example, and can't remember if he prayed 3 rak'ahs or 2 rak'ahs. And so he repeats it again and again and again, or he can't remember a verse, or someone who makes wudu consistently because they feel like they're unclean. And so they're spending hours in the bathroom. And we're seeing a rise in scrupulosity within the Muslim community in response to many different mental health struggles and factors that are impacting that. So know that red flag behaviors can look different in different people. When you notice a change in someone, maybe somebody withdrawing, maybe someone acting in a way that might classify as a manic episode, maybe somebody that is responding differently, identify those behaviors. Be connected to those in your life that you love, that are important to you. Be connected to yourself internally. If you are identifying self-harm, whether it's cutting or harming oneself in another way, if you're identifying suicide ideation, where maybe it's still at that depression stage of saying, I really just don't want to wake up in the morning, I wish I wasn't here, that's still considered a red flag. Help someone get the help that they need. Help them find the resources. And that's why programs like tonight are so important, because NAMI is an organization that provides resources. And we have so many resources within our Muslim community even that address mental health struggles and that recognize that it's not either or. Either you maintain your Islam or you address your mental health struggles. It's not a choice. It's not a competition. We know that the struggles we face can be both internal and external. And we look at, Bronfenbrenner's ecological system, which is a fancy theory that focuses on the different systems that impact us. And when we look at these different systems, we see that within our own homes, we may struggle with debt and family fears. We may have language barriers that make it difficult for us to communicate. We may have our struggles with self-worth or fitting in. Maybe we've experienced loss and trauma, marital problems, a toxic home life, difficulty in our professions. There are so many difficulties we may experience, or even a crisis of faith. And all of these can lead to mental health struggles. And these are mental health struggles you don't have to go through alone. You're not meant to go through them alone. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, we know has impacted us. And we know that for many of us, we've spent a lot of time questioning, what are we facing? What is this virus? That uncertainty, what are our children facing? How do we help ourselves? And these questions can take a toll on us. And it's important to be able to talk about them, to unload these internal difficulties and to dissect them, not just within our families, but to seek therapeutic intervention to help us through them. And this kind of touches on that return to normalcy. As we start to come out maybe the other side with our vaccines and maybe having our children start to get vaccinated now as well, we may think that finally things are going to go back to normal. But after any traumatic incidents, and this pandemic has definitely been emotionally traumatic in so many ways to so many people, there is never a full return to normalcy. There may be a path towards adaptation. And through that path towards adaptation, we're going to need adjustment. We're going to experience frustration. And we may go through a honeymoon period where we're very excited for our kids to go back to school, for us to go back to work, for us to travel. But there's also going to be difficulty. And that's why in Surah Al-Inshirah, the chapter that was recited earlier, the second chapter that was recited, the reminder, Inna ma'al usri yusra, that surely with difficulty, there is also ease. And that helps in guiding us through these difficult moments. So how do we bring wellness into our lives? Overcoming the stigma, that we can't be faithful or we can't have strong iman and also seek mental health care, that's step one. Knowing that our faith, our iman can be strong and we can still struggle with mental health. And we can seek help for our mental health struggles. Or our iman can be weak, our faith can be weak, and that could be part of the struggle. And there's no shame in that, that we can still seek the help that we need. Help from maybe an imam, a local, someone that we're connected with in our community, but also help from a mental health professional. There's also things that we can do for ourselves to help ourselves through the difficult moments. Seek help, absolutely seek help, but also recognize that mindfulness is not something that is, antithetical to the deen, antithetical to the faith, right? Mindfulness is also part of our faith. Many of you may be familiar with, the apps that gained popularity, particularly in this past year, like Calm and Headspace, and I think there's one that's called Mindfulness. And what these apps do is they guide you through guided breathing, through reminders that, you can realign yourself and ground yourself in despite the difficulty you may be going through. And so from an Islamic perspective, we know that the terms al-muraqaba wal-hudur reference the concept of grounding oneself, being present, being mindful. At the start of this program, for those of you who are entering in, the beautiful names of Allah, the 99 names of Allah were being recited in the background before Archie started the introductions. And reciting those names, that dhikr, right? Having that remembrance of God by reciting the names, it's a form of mindfulness. And we know in the Quran, we're reminded, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ, that verily it's in the remembrance of God do hearts find peace. And so using a mindfulness technique, it's not something that's foreign, it's not something that's Western, it's something that's part of our tradition as well. And we see this in the beautiful example of a very simple grounding or mindfulness technique that's known as the 5-4-3-2-1 method. And I bring this up here because I know that there's a lot of fear that surrounds seeking mental health help. There's a lot of fear that surrounds, the idea of sharing your pain, sharing your difficulty with what may feel like a stranger. But the reality is that when you are speaking your pain, when you are sharing your difficulty with someone, it is not a matter of shame. It's a matter of connecting. And one of the techniques that may be shared with you, usually used in CBT or DBT forms of therapy, is a grounding technique like the 5-4-3-2-1 method, which is a reminder to stop, the negative train of thoughts, whether you're experiencing a moment of anxiety or you're going through sustained moments of depression, right? Being able to stop that negative thought train, and doing so by looking around and identifying 5 things you can see, then 4 things you can touch, then 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can hear, and 1 thing you can taste. And this is, again, not foreign to our deen, because when you think about 5 things you can see, think about the calm that you may get when you look at a verse from the Quran that's hung up on your wall. And I know for many of us in our households, having a verse from the Quran on the wall is something that brings us peace. The 4 things you can touch, think about the tasbih and the reminder that pushing on our fingers and reminding ourselves, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. It's actually been noted in scientific journals that pushing on each uqla or on each part of the finger acts almost like a form of acupuncture that evokes within the body, in different parts of the body, a sense of calm. This is part of our faith. This is not foreign to our faith. This is part of the remedy that we seek as well. But being able to work through these difficulties with a professional, with a mental health professional, a therapist that can guide you through it, can be the reminder that we need. 3 things you can smell. Think of the bukhur, the oud, the misk that covers the Kaaba, that is on the cloth that covers the Kaaba, and that when we go to Umrah or Hajj, we'll often bring back with us. Think of the calm that brings. 2 things you can hear. How many of us, in listening to the recitation of the Quran by Brother Musa at the start of this program, felt a sense of calm enter into our hearts by listening to those words? And 1 thing you can taste. Think of the black seed. Think of the honey. Think of the dates that the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, used to value and used to bring peace to his heart. Taste something that can bring you that sense of calm. And look for the helpers, because that is so important. You're not in this alone. And all we need to do is glance at Surah Taha, the verses in the Quran that talk about Musa, alayhi salam, the prophet Moses, who was commanded by God to take on a very difficult task, which was to go speak to Fir'aun, to speak to Pharaoh. And he responds saying that, this is going to be hard. And he makes a prayer asking God, Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. He asks God to open for him his heart, to remove from his tongue the knot, to allow those that he would speak to understand. But then he also asks to be able to have a wazir, or someone from his family, to come with him, his brother Harun. So even in his moment of difficulty, the prophet Musa, peace be upon him, turns to God, says a prayer, but also asks for help. Look for the helpers within your community. Look for support. A therapist is a helper. A counselor is a helper. A mental health professional is a helper. A psychiatrist is a helper. A psychologist is a helper. Seek that help. It doesn't mean that you're turning away from God. It means that you're actively seeking a remedy or a solution for the difficulty you're going through. So I just want to end with one final note, and it's a little bit of a story that kind of helps us better understand what does it look like to really achieve spiritual, socio-emotional wellness. And it really looks a lot like confidence. It looks like self-empowerment, like a sense of strength that's rooted in our love of Allah, that recognition of la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that there is no might nor power except by Allah, and that Allah, God, guides us to that which helps us. It looks like contentment, and it looks like joy and happiness. And the story goes that there was a young woman who was going through a great deal of struggles in terms of mental health, struggles in her personal life. And she went to her grandma, and she was very upset, telling her about these struggles. And her grandma told her, wait. She put a pot of boiling water on the stove, and she told her, I want you to look at this carrot. What does this carrot look like? And she said, well, it looks hard, it looks strong. So then the grandma took the carrot and put it in the boiling water. And she said, the boiling water are the difficult circumstances. What happened to the carrot? And she said it became soft. She said, look at this egg, describe it to me. She said, it's hard on the outside and soft on the inside. And the grandma put it in the boiling water, and it became hard on both the inside and the outside. And then she said, look at this coffee bean. And she put the coffee bean in the boiling water. And she told the granddaughter to look. And the granddaughter looked, and she saw that the coffee bean had not changed, but the water had changed into coffee. And so the grandma reminded her that when things are difficult, that she doesn't have to be like the carrot and become soft. She doesn't have to be like the egg and become hardened, but she can be like the coffee bean and change those difficult circumstances. Seeking mental health help is just like that. So I ask that you all be like the coffee bean, and I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal guides all of us through our difficulties and helps us find the helpers. Thank you to NAMI and Archie and everybody for putting together this important program today.
Okay, now we will be taking questions. If anyone has questions, please put it below in the chat, and we will have Sister Suzy Ismail answer them.
So I'm seeing some questions that I'll just verbally answer. Sorry, Salma. I was just seeing some questions about whether or not we see clients. So you are welcome to visit us at www.cornercounseling.com for more information about our organization. And yes, we do offer intervention services. So not mental health, but intervention services. And we can talk more about that if anyone else has questions. I'll drop the website in the box here.
While we're waiting for questions, I actually have a question of my own. So I was just wondering, what can Muslims do within their own specific communities to combat the mental health stigma if they cannot find the means locally?
So that's a great question, Salma. And I think it is incumbent upon each of us to step up to the plate and play a role in removing the mental health stigma. First of all, facilitate conversations just like this one, where we normalize talking about mental health difficulty. sharing our own struggles as well. In our community, it's so often considered shameful to talk about depression, to talk about, struggling with bipolar disorder, to talk about schizophrenia. And so many times we'll either hide it or we'll simply take maybe just a faith-based approach where we'll say something like, oh, it's because this person didn't read Quran, or it's because a jinn has entered into this person. And we know that we have to address things from both the spiritual and the mental health perspective. So talk about it, have conversations, maybe if you're comfortable sharing a little bit with your friends and your family, moments where you've struggled. Because when we let our guard down, when we allow our vulnerabilities to show, then we open up the doorway to more understanding and more comprehension. And do your research, know what's out there. I promise you there are resources in every state. And now with the onset of the pandemic, maybe one good thing that came from it, despite so much difficulty, was the ability to have so much televisit health appointments. And so many mental health providers now are providing televisits, even if they are in different areas or further away from where you might be located.
Jazakallah khairan for that. Thank you. Okay, someone's asking, what are some ways that I could start up a conversation about my mental health with my parents so that they're more understanding of it?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I think, there definitely does seem to be a bit of a generation gap sometimes, for many of us growing up here in the US, for example, our parents maybe grew up in other countries, and in those other countries, mental health may be something that wasn't talked about. I remember, we struggled a little bit when we first started working with refugee clients, particularly from Syria in 2016, realizing that there was no real Arabic word to describe therapist. There was no real Arabic word to describe counselor. And maybe the closest word that we could find, and the word that was, traditionally used to describe that therapy almost equated to, crazy doctor. And so really the closest we could find was maybe advice giver or a guidance provider. And so we're looking at generations that maybe never even had the terminology to describe what mental health care is and what mental health difficulties look like. So in having a conversation with parents, I would say, first try to understand their perspective, because when we come from a perspective of only wanting the people in front of us to understand where we're coming from, we've already lost them. Start the conversation by telling them that that it's hard for them to understand what depression is or what anxiety is, that it's not something that they're used to, but that you want to guide them through it and you want them to better understand what it means. And then without, maybe making it personal at first, taking more of like a bird's eye view, a view from above, where you're giving them an overview of what is, mental health. There's been so many strides made in the field of Islamic psychology. We can look at a recent study that was done out of the Stanford Islamic Psychology Lab by Dr. Lamia Awad that showed that suicide ideation is actually twice as likely among the Muslim community in America than it is among other faiths. Bring that study up to your parents, explain to them that it's a problem, that it's something that happens within our Muslim communities, and then talk about how you're personally affected and impacted with some mental health struggles.
Okay, there is one more question. I think we only have time for one more. So the question is, could you please ask how mental health okay, one moment. Can you please explain how mental health from a spiritual perspective is caused because someone is not close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it caused because someone is giving into this dunya? How can it be explained?
Okay. So great question. And we could probably go a couple of hours on this, but I'll try to surmise it in just a couple of minutes. So we had said earlier that it's important not to create this either or dichotomy, that someone can be strong in faith and still struggle with mental health illness. Someone may be struggling in their faith, and because of the struggle in their faith, experience mental health difficulties. And so there can be any combination of, faith and mental health, and it doesn't need to be an either or. So trying to equate, mental health struggles or difficulties with being too, steeped or mired in the dunya or in worldly pleasures is also a bit of a false way of looking at this, because many times mental health struggles can be linked to a chemical component. They can be linked to a genetic component. They can be linked to environmental or circumstantial. They can be linked to relational. They can be linked to past trauma. So there are many different linkages to kind of understand mental health struggles. And we can't just isolate and say it's either spiritual or it's, biological or medical. This is the holistic approach that we want to take, and understanding that as human beings, we are complex. And because of our complexities, our spiritual may play a part in our mental health, as does our relational and our emotional and our physical and our circumstances and our environment and the people we surround ourselves with. So let's try not to isolate and say it's either or, either you have faith or, you're going to struggle with mental health illnesses. That's not the case. And I'm hoping that today's presentation addressed that.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, and I think that's all the questions we can ask for now. And I will pass it back to Archie.
I want to thank you again, Dr. Ismail, for just such an informative and beautiful presentation speaking on mental health in Islam. For anyone who didn't get their question answered tonight, do you want to put your contact information in the chat so they can follow up with you?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to put our office email address, and that way if you email the office directly, they will definitely get it to me. Sometimes if it goes into my personal inbox, it gets swallowed by so many of the other things that are in there, but the office will definitely address it. So it's just info, oops, I left the corner out. It's info@cornercounseling.com. So ignore that part, guys. I'm writing it for real now, okay? So info@cornercounseling.com.
No problem at all.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Ismail. We just ask that maybe you'll stick around for our panel discussion that we have after a brief intermission. At this time, what I will be doing is introducing our esteemed panel, where we will discuss various subject matter within the subjects of mental health in Islam. And so I will introduce them one by one and enter them into everyone's view. We will begin with Dr. Najah Zaaeed. Dr. Najah Zaaeed joined the Department of Health, Promotion, and Wellness at the State University of New York, Oswego, or SUNY Oswego, in August of 2019. Previously, Dr. Zaaeed was an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Public Health at Falk College, Syracuse University. Since 2016, she has taught as an adjunct professor in public health at Syracuse University and SUNY Oswego. Dr. Zaaeed previously served as mental health specialist for Interfaith Works of Central New York and continues to address the mental health needs of immigrant and refugee communities across the globe. Dr. Najah Zaaeed.
Thank you, Archie, for the introduction. So I guess we can. Where would you?
I'm gonna bring up the other the other panelists as well.
All right.
At this time, I will introduce Imam Mohammed ElFiki. Mohammed ElFiki is the Imam or spiritual leader of the Islamic Society of Central New York and a member of the Interfaith Works Roundtable of Faith Leaders. He has a degree in Islamic Studies from Al-Azhar University in Egypt. He also received a master's degree in marriage and family therapy and a CAS in child therapy from Syracuse University. Imam ElFiki has attended a 6-session workshop on traditional Islamically integrated psychotherapy at Chicago School of Professional Psychology. He also has received training as a youth mental health first aid instructor at USA Mental Health First Aid. Imam ElFiki has been recently received the Leadership Award from the Interfaith Works of Central New York. Imam ElFiki.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Khalil Abdulkhabir, retired from 23 years of service as a ministerial program coordinator for New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. This career started resulting from 11 years of volunteering with Yasin Mosque's Muslim Prison Committee in Brooklyn, New York. He also completed mental health first aid training and facilitator training from the National Council for Mental Well-Being, a county agency and faith leaders' effort to increase mental health recognition in the local faith communities. At the local masjid, the Islamic Society of Central New York, Khalil coordinates the ISCNY Reentry Forum, a dialogue service committee designed to assist those re-entering society from institutional life. Khalil Abdulkhabir. And there's a possibility that we may also add Dr. Ismail. I know she had to step away for Maghrib during our intermission, so we may add, actually, she may be
back. Yes.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna bring you in too. Okay, firstly, I have to say it truly is an honor to have each of you on this panel discussion. This is part of NAMI Greater Cleveland's faith-based initiative. We've had a few different events, one on the Black church, one on interfaith, and this one specifically for mental health in Islam. And so I kind of want to just dive in, based on what we've heard tonight. Can you speak a little bit about, for someone who is not a practicing Muslim, someone who's an outsider, some of the areas where mental health affects specifically the Muslim community? I know that you also do work, Dr. Ismail, with refugees as well. Can you kind of just speak on that perspective for someone who has no idea some of the complexities that someone from the Islamic community goes through as it pertains to mental health? Are there just a lot of similarities there, or are there some major differences?
Yeah. So thanks for starting off the conversation with the panel with such an important question. For many of us on this past September 11th, recognizing that 20 years had passed, a lot of the conversations within the Muslim community was life before September 11th as a Muslim American and life after September 11th. And I think without a doubt, the statistics show the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding did a study of the increase in anxiety linked to Islamophobia following September 11th, and also once again following 2016 with the presidential election and the Muslim ban and everything that kind of went hand in hand with that. And we saw a spike in an increase of anxiety resulting from Islamophobia after 2016, which actually rivaled the increase that occurred after September 11th. So we're looking at issues that are very prevalent within the Muslim community in response to Islamophobia, in response to hate crimes, but also in response to issues such as the Muslim ban, forced migrants that are leaving countries like Syria and Afghanistan, and so many of the difficulties that they're facing in resettlement and the problems that come along with that. So definitely there are unique mental health difficulties that exist within the Muslim community, but those mental health difficulties can be addressed in many ways that we look at other mental health difficulties within the community at large as well.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to chime in on that? Okay, we can go to the next question. So I know that there also was some talk about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Can you, for some of our Muslim audience members, can you speak to maybe any other representations within the Quran where there's discussion of, you know, coping with mental illness and how it can relate to how we cope with mental illness today?
I think Imam Mohammed ElFiki has some great knowledge from that area.
Thank you, Dr. Najah, and thank you, Dr. Suzy. I'm highly impressed of your presentation. Actually, you had a good grasp on Islamic knowledge that I personally, as an Imam, feel jealous speaking about this now in your presence here. Thank you very much. May Allah bless you, Rabb, Allahumma ameen. And thank you, Dr. Najah, for referring the question. Mental health is in the heart of Muslim society and Muslim narrative and Muslim concern since Islam started. And we may not have much knowledge about Muslim early physicians and psychologists and psychiatrists, but as early as the 9th century, we had Abu Zayd al-Balkhi in his book, Maintenance of Bodies and Souls. He actually divided the mental health illnesses into neurosis and psychosis. And I believe we're not talking about psychosis here, because psychosis, we talk about medication, and we talk about neurosis. And he mentioned that he even went into typology of that neurosis classification, believing that all the originated from sadness, anger, obsessiveness, and anxiety. And then he went through how our spirituality and our Islam can help us deal with these four, again, sadness, anger, anxiety, and obsessiveness. And you'll be amazed when you find out how much resources in our faith in the 23 years of Prophet Muhammad as a prophet, him living Quran and him leaving a legacy behind. So back to your question about Prophet Muhammad and Quran. Actually, we find Prophet Moses at this anger at one situation that he's pulling his brother by the beard and so angry. We find Prophet Jonah in Quran again as leaving his people and mughadib and in too much anger. We find Prophet Muhammad feeling so much depressed to the extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ. Are you gonna kill yourself over them because you don't want to believe? And we find Prophet Muhammad in so much stress again from what these people are saying about him day and night. Actually, that takes us back to the question, the previous question, Muslims in America. And Prophet Muhammad was accused of too many things, to the moment Allah himself saying in Quran, قَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ. Oh Prophet, we know that your chest is being tightened. We know that your heart is being weighed heavy. We know that you're under a lot of stress because of what they say. But Allah told him in the next ayah, فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ. Say Subhanallah, say Alhamdulillah. And that's something Dr. Suzy mentioned. And we may not know that Prophet Muhammad himself was a victim of magic, he was bewitched. Some people might not believe in that, but it doesn't matter, believers or not, so many believe in magic. And Rasulullah himself was a victim of that for about 40 days. And then he was taught that al-mu'awwadatayn, qul a'udhu bi falaq wa rabbin nas, and using them in the dua of Jibreel. And we so some examples in Quran. These are just few of many, and Dr. Suzy of course mentioned that. But what I want to stress here on is mental illness, if it's psychosis, it should be thought of as any other illness. It should be thought of as just somebody having diabetes, but stigma is around, and Muslims are not an exception. But when Muslims know that our Prophet, peace be upon him, went through that He was bewitched. It means a magician, an evil magician, an evil man just did some spell, and Rasulullah was affected, even though he is spiritually in top, he is religiously top, and that hasn't taken away from him as a prophet, or from him as a human, or from him as a believer. And he went through that, and he passed it. He left example to us for that, and that's number one. So stigma should be removed, and we should teach. The other thing is, as Dr. Suzy said, patience is active. Rasulullah, one day, this woman came to him with epilepsy, and everybody know the story. And she said, make supplication for me, I get recovered. And the Prophet said, if you wish, I can make that supplication, but if you want to be patient, you will be with me in paradise, in Jannah, in heaven. And she said, no, I want to be patient, be with you in paradise, in heaven. It's something as simple as epilepsy. This woman, for her patience, and patience doesn't mean to surrender, but to seek help and ask doctors and take medicine, do whatever needed. But something as simple as that, she is promised paradise. So everybody, whatever you suffer from, every Muslim, whether mental illness or physical illness, even though they are just illness, we just call mental because of the symptoms here. Every Muslim should believe that with whatever they go through, they're rewarded, and it's part of that test, as Dr. Suzy said, the ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah, which Allah, when he talked about the test, Allah said some little of fear. And right after that little of fear, he gave glad tidings for people. By the way, I'm done talking. This time, Archie, I'm an imam. I talk a lot. So when I start talking,
no, it's great.
Wave, say imam, thank you.
No, it's great.
Give 2 minutes. So
it's great information. But there was one thing that you did mention, which obviously is something that's very common in mental health across the board, which is stigma. You know, at NAMI Greater Cleveland, it's part of our mission to break the stigma with informational, educational programming such as tonight. And actually, my next question I wanted to direct to Khalil. Just based on your background, I know you've done a lot of work in prison ministry with reentry, and obviously, given that type of circumstance, there's a lot of stigma there. There's a lot of despair. There's a lot of feeling that there's no way I can re-enter society with what I've done, where I've been, what I have seen. Can you talk through some of the work that you've done with some of the prisoners that you've worked with over the years?
Well, alhamdulillah, thank you, Archie, for having me in this panel and talking about this very valuable subject for the Muslim community. And I didn't want to miss one word of Dr. Ismail's talk, because it was very good. And I always love to hear Mohammed, give a talk, and have all the love in the world for Sister Najah. So alhamdulillah. Those persons who were formerly incarcerated, who are coming home, actually face a double jeopardy almost. It's the stigma of one, being incarcerated, and two, in some cases, the stigma of some mental health condition. So what we've done as a part of our work here in the community is we have a little program that we designed to work those individuals back into the spiritual community, into the religious community, and gain some relief from or acceptance of their prior condition and maybe even their mental problems. So we call it Reentry Forum, and the forum part has to do with a dialogue. So, and that's what we really strive to achieve, is to have a dialogue between community members and those persons who are coming home and being a part, entering into this community. Because sometimes, when they come home and they feel isolated, from the environment that they've been in, and that has to be worked through. And the community members, like you mentioned about those individuals in the first question, about those persons who are coming from traumatic situations in other countries. The best thing we can do also, again, is to welcome them and to have dialogue with them, to listen to their condition, to get to understand what their problems are, what they've been through, and just be a non-judgmental and welcoming to those individuals, to get them and make them feel like they're a part of this community here, and that they can really excel, do well, and become a meaningful part of it. So yeah, we do all the work we can in that regard. Of course, some of the illnesses are a little prevalent, and unfortunately, the community members really need a lot of education in this regard of understanding, being able to understand the signs and how to manage their relationship with these individuals. Not just, we've had some experiences in the past, and they didn't turn out very well. We ended up calling because we didn't know how to manage or understand that the person is going through a crisis situation. We end up calling the police, and they send them off to a program in the hospital, which is not really a good thing. I mean, it's, they get the service that they need, but at the same time, they may feel alienated from the community and ashamed to come back. And some of the men, have mentioned that the benefit is in the being in the community, being at the prayer. It helps with this schizophrenia, some of the voices they hear. One person told me that. He said he feels better being there, at the prayer, because it cuts down on that voice, interaction. So, these are the things that if you don't understand what he's going through, you're going to alienate him and look at him kind of strange, and not really deal with it, not give him the help that he actually needs. So yeah, we work in those areas. It's a process, and we're going to stay at it, inshallah, as long as we need to. The Imam is very helpful in the community. He really points out those individuals, makes them feel welcome. I'm really appreciative of his efforts, and he's done a lot. He just doesn't know it, but he's done a lot in that regard. Yes, sir.
Thank you for that. The next question I wanted to ask Dr. Zaaeed, obviously we've been going through this pandemic. It's been up and down. We think we're out of the woods, then we're back in the woods. And with you're working specifically at a college. So obviously there's a lot of, virtual versus in-person, back and forth. And I know in some of the conversations that I had with a few of you before with this program, that some of the anxiety has been set in, through supplication and prayer. Can you talk about balancing the practice of supplication and prayer with also utilizing mental health resources, just from your perspective, Dr. Zaaeed?
Sure. So I'm a social worker, and I coincidentally work with a company called Cornerstone Mobile Counseling. So it's kind of ironic that we have Dr. Ismail with Cornerstone as well. And one of the things that I've noticed, even with some of the college students that I've assisted in different sessions, is the anxiety that has increased. But we're also, as mentioned by Dr. Ismail, we're seeing this anxiety that's also built up in K through 12, the 0 to 18 age range, where integrating back into the social realm when they've spent nearly 18 months primarily indoors. So they're in two worlds, the virtual world and then the face-to-face world, as is the rest of the Muslim community. So how do we go back and reintegrate and go away from isolation? And using the faith, even when I'm working with non-Muslims, we tend to examine the holistic method, addressing the root causes of some of the mental health concerns. And so I use the bioecological model, as well as the 8 dimensions of wellness. I use them in combination to try to really get to the root causes or the root concerns that are causing these stressors to the individuals. The other thing that we do is we work holistically as a community. So Brother Khalil and Imam Mohammed I actually spearheaded a mental health first aid instructor training here in Syracuse, New York. We had several chaplains that worked in the New York State Correctional Facilities, as well as community members and the imam as well, who participated in the instructor training. So now we have a community of individuals that we can utilize when needed. So if I'm not available, the imam, Brother Khalil, someone else is available to assist our community members, and also based on their needs. So if they've just been recently released from a facility, and Brother Khalil might be the best person that can support them with using the mental health first aid techniques. The imam as well, having an imam that's knowledgeable helps us plug in the spirituality component, because he's more knowledgeable than I in terms of religion. So I can actually go to him and confirm what I am doing before I actually work with the clients. So that's, having the reaffirmation and having this community-based approach to addressing mental health is key. And the same thing when we're working with college students or others, whether it's through telehealth sessions or in person, we would want to use those same tools so that we can better assist individuals. And one of the things I will mention is that I always stress, even to the clients that I work with, is to plug in the National Suicide Hotline as a speed dial on their phone. So the 1-800-273-8255. Please, put that on your phone and share that with others as well. Also, as Muslims, yes, we are Muslims. We want to cater and address the needs of Muslims through an Islamic approach, but we also know, as Dr. Ismail mentioned, we have others that may be non-Muslims, the resources that we may reach out to, which includes NAMI. So, and also the other thing, for example, in Cleveland, because many of the individuals here are from the Cleveland area, the Ibn Sina Free Clinic is holding a mental health and wellness day on October 9th between 4:30 to 7:30. It's when we work holistically together as a community across states even, we can better provide the services we need to address mental health for our community members.
Thank you for that, Najah. I also want to shout out Dr. Saeed, who is in the audience from the Ibn Sina Center. And one of the things that you spoke on was NAMI as a resource. I just want to reiterate that NAMI Greater Cleveland also helps to facilitate mental health first aid certification training. So I know that our speakers have gone through that training. I want to let any of our viewers that are here in Greater Cleveland know that you can reach out to NAMI Greater Cleveland through our website, namigreatercleveland.org. You can reach out to myself and or Carrie Kepik, who's also supporting education coordinator, to coordinate that. We also have done that at a couple churches in the area, and it's something that we definitely pride ourselves in. And so as we're starting to get close to time, I just wanted to ask one final question. I also wanted to make a note that Dr. Zaaeed is a Cleveland native, even though she's no longer living in Cleveland. It's very important that we have that, we acknowledge that Cleveland connection. But lastly, again, the most important thing that we're looking to do is break stigma. And part of how we can do that is to have more conversations and discussions about mental health. What would you offer in terms of any final suggestions for those who may be a little afraid or don't know how to address mental health with their family members, with their imam, with their community? What are some practical ways that they can share about mental health?
One of the things that I will mention is that there is no household that does not have an individual that may not be enduring some type of mental health challenge. So when we're talking about mental health, it may be the fear, we know culturally that there may be a fear of letting others know. But there's always someone else that may be experiencing a similar situation, or that can be a support. So it may be the educator, it may be your doctor, it may be your imam, it may be just a friend. And as Dr. Ismail mentioned, there are many apps as well in regards to Talkspace and Calm and all the other apps that are out there, but there's also hotlines, and there are Muslim hotlines as well. So those are some of the first steps I would recommend in terms of who you would reach out to. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone, even if it's going onto a social media platform where individuals are able to talk about their experiences anonymously. If that is a method that can help you while you maintain your identity and privacy, that may be the route for you. It all depends on the individual.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Dr. Zaaeed is saying in regard to this matter. All of the religious leaders, imams, should actually take the training. They should take the first aid courses wherever they are. And I would encourage the governing bodies of all the masajid to also engage in the training so that they're able to understand and recognize these conditions. And at the same time, also encourage their communities. You know, as Dr. Zaaeed has mentioned, that we do encourage all the New York State chaplains to take this mental first aid training. And it's really one of the best training courses I've ever had. I've had a lot of training courses, but this was the most meaningful one.
I might say, thank you, Imam, thank you, Dr. Najah. In the same regard, it starts by faith leaders breaking this silence and bring this up in Friday sermons, not just on one-on-one talks or in small gatherings, and to make people aware that first it is real. Because, for example, you know, in the Arab background, people say, I'm mukta'ib shwaya, I'm a little depressed. And when someone is diagnosed with depression, they think that that depression is like that's what they go through every morning. So people use that term and they belittle it, and it turns into, oh, are you depressed? So what? Go do this and do that. You don't know that that person is really incapable now of doing anything, and he or she needs help. On the other hand, again, the stigma and people fear to share. And one thing I did myself, I kept telling my community over the past few years that I'm doing master in marriage and family therapy. I bring psychological terms on the sermons, and I ended up with many community members coming and sharing with me things about their suicidal ideation, things they wouldn't share even with their closest friends. They share things about them cutting themselves or them going through this and that, or it's a big list. And here, because I know my scope of work and I know what I can do and what I cannot do, I have a good network in Syracuse where I refer to beautiful brothers and sisters, our community psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, Dr. Rahat Khan, Dr. Muslim Khan, Dr. Saeed, Sister Anisa Diab, and of course, Dr. Najah, and Imam Khalil, and many others. And I always refer, and I always work collaboratively with everybody I refer to. And finally, it's not just about the ritual part of the faith, it's about the community sense in the faith, you know, and we coming together is something. I mean, when the Prophet's cousin passed away, he told his people to go attend to his family before they going through a lot now. Just being together, sense of community. So it is the stigma, it is not belittling what people go through, it is know your scope and connect, have a good network, and make people feel safe that they can share and they wouldn't in any way be thought of in any less because of what they shared. And you know, the reputation spreads, and the word spread, and hopefully you will have a community that really seek help and they don't find that stigma anymore. And they the best thing about mental illness is when someone recovers, it's not he or her alone are getting better, it's the whole circle, family and the friends. And so with everyone saved, it's a whole lot, a bunch of people are joining the happy club, so to speak. And soon, hopefully, community will be in a better shape.
I love that answer. With one person healing, we all heal as a community. That's beautiful. At this time, I want to open up the chat for questions. Our lovely intern who kicked off this evening, Salma Sharif, will be taking questions. Salma, if you'd like, you can ask the first question.
Okay, so we have a question from earlier. This person is asking, what are some of the signs that I am struggling with mental health issues? I find when I was in the crux of it, I just lived with it until it became a much bigger problem. I think this person's asking, what are the signs that indicate that they are dealing with a mental health issue? If anyone on the panel could answer to that.
So, I'd like to kind of take a stab and then hear from everyone else who can kind of provide their experience as well. I think it's a great question because a lot of times we may be experiencing the seedlings, the beginnings of possible depression, of possible clinical anxiety, but we brush it under the rug. And so rather than just thinking, I must feel like completely debilitated and, lying in bed and not functioning anymore in order to seek help, we need to seek help way before that. And, we always say preventative medicine is the best sort of medicine, right? So don't wait and think like, well, I need to see certain signs. If you're experiencing sadness, talk to someone. There is no harm in, I put up the crisis text line up there, 741-741. If you text Salam, so we have our Cornerstone interventionists and several other organizations as well, man the crisis text hotline 24 hours a day. So someone will connect with you, and usually they will try to connect you with someone of your faith if you specifically ask for that. Reach out from the first moment of sadness, from the first moment of grief, from the first moment of sorrow. Do not wait until you are struggling with depression, you're struggling with despair. Use preventative medicine. And I love what the person had identified and said he just kind of kept going. And that happens when we're not in tune with our bodies, with our minds, with our hearts and our souls. And so it starts with awareness. Know yourself. Know yourself. When you're in a good place, don't wait until you're in a bad place, right? Know what feeling good feels like to you. And if you know what feeling good feels like to you, you'll also be able to know what it feels like when you're not so good. And you'll be able to address it before it gets to a place where it's really, really difficult to come back from.
And see, what I heard in the question was that you've already identified that you may have a mental health concern. My question, the follow-up question would be is, you've let it go on for a time. Have you tried to look into talking to someone? And what were the reasons why you may or may have not followed up with it if you're not seeing someone at this moment? Sometimes it can be that, we live with it, it builds up, it gets the feelings, the symptoms are there. It could be in the form of aches, body pains, fatigue. But the question is, have you tried to look for a professional that you can go see? Have you talked to your healthcare provider, even your internal medicine doctor, about your symptoms that you have felt and what you believe you've identified? And then move forward. So those are the questions I would ask, and then find out, like, sometimes it can be that we are looking for someone that can relate to us. Like, I have a client, for example, that says, I want someone that I can identify with. I don't want a typical Caucasian mental health provider. And so they want to have that feeling of connectedness. And sometimes that is the case also, even for Muslims. We tend to look for someone that we can make connections with, that someone that gets it, that knows our lifestyle, our faith. And so maybe those are some of the reasons why, if you have not seen someone yet, that may be some of the reasons why you have not seen someone. And then how do you address that so that you can get the proper help?
Yes, very, in addition to that, he has defined the situation. He knows that he has a situation and he has the stigma, it seems like, but also he may not have the trust in, anyone, even of the medical profession. From my perspective as African American, we have a thing called Tuskegee syndrome, where we're very distrustful of the medical system itself. So it makes it even much more difficult to seek that assistance or help, and hopefully he can find somebody that he can talk with very, very confidentially. I like your suggestion about the healthcare provider. If he talked to a doctor and just mentioned it, I'm sure the doctor would make some referrals for him and keep everything in confidence for him.
One of the other things I want to plug in, and this is the importance of following up with healthcare providers if the individual is prescribed medication to address their mental health illness, because oftentimes there may be some modifications that are needed. And even as a mental health specialist or therapist, it's important that we motivate the individual to talk to their healthcare providers. Some are very hesitant to follow up and say, hey, I don't think this medication's doing what it should be doing, or it's not effective. But if we motivate the individual to make the phone call and to follow up with them, hey, did you contact your healthcare provider? Did you talk about your medication? Those are also going to help the individual as well.
No, that's a big one. A lot of people who are on medication, either medication is too strong or it's not strong enough, and they don't go back and get the medication to, regulated to get them to a good place. And in a lot of cases, in our situation where we have incarcerated people coming home and so on and so on, a lot of them, the medication makes them feel bad. And so they drop the medication and they go to street drugs, which does the same thing exactly, but it doesn't have, unfortunately, it's much more addictive, but it doesn't have the same side effects. So there's a lot of problems here that really, healthcare workers need to work through and be aware of and address. I'm glad we're opening the door on this. This is good.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So the question is, relating to specifically Muslims and mental health, what advice can you give to Muslims who feel a certain anxiety, stigma, or judgment in accessing professional help, specifically to non-Muslim institutions where they cannot access it from Muslim professionals?
I hope I understood the question correctly, but therapy is an art, and the art work with Muslims and non-Muslims and be provided by Muslims and non-Muslims. Medication is the same. Yes, there is a difference if someone you can relate to, but the question is, it's again so relative. Like so many Muslims, Islam is not really the core of their life does not revolve around Islam. Yeah, they are Muslims, but if someone is like so much into practicing Islam, they are the ones who come usually to the Imam and they don't believe, but they are shocked when the Imam tells them, okay, I will see you, but you will go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or start with your PCP. Let's do this together. Let's do what, because some people misunderstand Islam, think Islam as the man came to the Prophet and he said, should I leave my camel loose or should I have trust in Allah, or should I tie it up? And the Prophet said, of course, tie it up and place your trust in Allah. That's what you do. Go take the medicine. Go see go seek help, and do everything possible and connect to your community. And above that, before that, after that, around that is trust your faith, place your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and work on that. So back to the question, seeking help from non-Muslim or from, I don't see any problem in that. but if it happened and they suspected something, they are asked to, if that happened, which is a big if, that against their faith, then they go ask their imams and they say, is that right? Is that wrong? What should we do in Islam? And remember, even in Islam, to maintain your health, you can take what's forbidden in different cases to maintain your health, like pills made of something you wouldn't touch if you're healthy, but because it's a necessity, it's a need. So the plan of Allah is mean the ease for us, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we need to work hard to get that ease of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with all the means Allah has created for us. I hope that answered the question.
I believe this person is clarifying. They were saying it in regards to Islamophobia. So how to deal with the fear of going to someone for mental health that's not Muslim with the fear of Islamophobia in mind.
I would say anyone who I hope and I believe every mental health expert in America is well trained how to recognize their biases and how to manage them and how to deal with their clients well. And that's America, generally speaking, coming to work ethics is top. So I believe they wouldn't be in their office if they had anything like that, because for sure, if they showed any symptoms of racism, let's say, or prejudice or anything, that would have been figured out and they would have been found another job long ago. So if they are there, they are trained on how to be professional.
Yeah, could I just?
Go ahead, brother.
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I understand exactly what you're saying, Imam, and you're correct. This individual and many others like him actually need to see a working relationship with the Imam, the religious community, and the healthcare provider. It's pretty much like what happens in I have to go back to the prison thing. When they get food, they want to make sure that the food is halal or just doesn't have this and that in it. So the spiritual care person there, the chaplain, has to go and make sure that that's not, that he's getting the right thing. So that gives that person the confidence to eat it. If he doesn't do that inspection or have that kind of relationship with the system, then the person kind of shies away and feels that he's being poisoned or some kind of negative thing is being directed at him. So, there has to be some working relationship with the spiritual community and the healthcare system on this regard. I don't know exactly how that happens, but that's what that person is actually looking for to validate his participation in that healthcare provider's health. Okay.
Well, and there are instances where individuals may encounter a healthcare provider or professional that may have some biases that are reflected.
No question.
What they are advising or in the treatments. One of the ways to address this, and it's happened to me personally. I mean, when I go to a doctor and I say, well, there's something happening with my head. Well, do you wash your hair? What, do all hijabis not wash their hair? That was an assumption made by a healthcare provider, but we are fortunate, I think, here in Syracuse, that we have been able to work, and this came from the effort of some healthcare providers. We've been able to collaborate effectively where the healthcare providers identify who are the Muslim leaders as well as the Muslim therapists or mental health specialists that are in the community that they can go to and seek advice from them. So they also reach out to the masjid to confirm, even the school district, if with the social workers or the principals, they're reaching out to the masjid. The masjid is more than just a place of worship. It's also a place of social service and outreach for the community and the overall Syracuse community. And so when we're working collaboratively and we're also out in the community giving seminars and sessions, the healthcare providers, the social workers, the professionals that are working directly with the Muslim community so that we can help dispel some of those concerns or biases, and at least at minimum, ask the professionals to put their biases on the side when they're working with clients, regardless of their backgrounds. And so that's what we do here in Syracuse. And I know that more individuals are doing that elsewhere. But when you encounter that, there are a couple of things that you can do. You can actually file a claim against that healthcare provider, go to your local organizations if you feel that it's something that's detrimental, or you can also reach out to your local masjid or social service organizations and ask them to intercede to educate that healthcare provider.
And
another healthcare provider at the same time.
Najah, I just want to add also, follow up on what I said. If somebody feel concerned about visiting a therapist or a mental health professional who doesn't look like him or her, then the answer is don't go to them. Find someone who look like you. You don't have to go. You want to feel safe. You want to feel you can connect. So don't go. And alhamdulillah, we have so many resources in every community. Muslim, you just ask and you'll be surprised. And when I talked about they, generally speaking, they manage their biases, because I received tremendous requests from non-Muslim mental health experts asking me certain questions about how to deal with clients of theirs from Muslim point of view. And they ask questions, and they even sometimes ask if they can, if that person can get them to sign privacy, what the word? Anyways, they can visit me. And so what I'm saying is my experience, my limited experience is most, if not all, people who work in mental health, they are there because they want to help people. They have something good in them. That the field is not really lucrative, but it's they got something good in them. They want to help people. So and it's your role, your job is to teach them about your culture, because they don't know. You tell them, and they should meet you where you are.
Thank you for that, Imam. I was actually going to chime in and say the same. When I sought out my therapist, you know, I've sought out a therapist that looked like me, an African-American male, and it was the best decision I could have ever made. So I would encourage whoever asked that question the same, to look for someone that looks like you, that you can relate to, that understands your perspective, because there's no greater feeling being able to open up, be vulnerable with someone who understands your worldview. So at this time, I want to thank each of our panelists, our keynote speaker, Dr. Suzy Ismail. I want to thank Dr. Najah Zaaeed, Imam Mohammed ElFiki, as well as Brother Khalil Abdulkhabir. I want to thank our fantastic intern, Salma Sharif, and her brother, Musa Sharif, who started our event with the recitation of some chapters from the Quran. I wish all of you peace. I thank you for joining us this evening. As I stated before in the chat, I know it felt a little overbearing, but the surveys are very important to NAMI Greater Cleveland. If you really enjoyed this rich program, we ask that you take a brief moment to fill out the survey. That information goes directly to our funders to ensure that we do more programs like this one, Peace of Mind, Mental Health in Islam. So again, take a brief moment to fill out that survey. We did get a few surveys as they were coming in during the talk. But outside of that, peace be upon you all. Have a great evening. Thank you for joining us. Good night.